Zebulun, Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee and do powerfully command thee, O Spirit. Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee and do powerfully command.
In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Abracast. I'm your host, John Towers, and tonight we're going to be checking back in on the situation of World War III. Before we get started, I'd just like to remind everyone to check out Abracast.com, the Storefront, tarot cards, t-shirts, morale patches for your body armor, or your hat, or your backpack, or your laptop case. Whatever the fuck. I got my vessel of the art here, and it's actually filled to the brim with my favorite drink these days, my weapon of mass distraction, the Gin Jihad. So let's get this party started. Ooh, made that one a little rough. So we're going to start out in Afghanistan because I believe these two stories are somewhat linked. So this is The Hill. Watchdog points to dire conditions in Afghanistan amid U.S. agencies' resistance to oversight. This is a few days ago there by a lady by the name of Rebecca Beach. Government watchdog is offering a grim update on life in Afghanistan since the U.S. withdrawal, while chastising American agencies for rebuffing its attempt to review their efforts in the country since the Taliban takeover. Remember, Joe Biden says, "Hey, all you 2A guys out there, you're not going to be taking on the government, not with your AR-15s and your AK-47s. You need nuclear weapons and jet fighters." The Taliban did not need that to be you, Joe. The Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, which has been reviewing multiple agencies' work in the troubled nation for over a decade, said early Wednesday it has never faced this level of resistance to its oversight duties. One of the reasons I think this is linked with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine is all the aid we're sending to Ukraine, and no one is oversighting it. No accountants are traveling to Ukraine with this money to find out what's going on with it. I facetiously said a couple episodes again it was money laundering. Well, maybe not so facetiously. SIGAR, which is, again, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, for the first time in its history, is unable this quarter to provide Congress and the American people with a full accounting of this U.S. government spending due to the non-cooperation of several U.S. government agencies, the agency wrote in its quarterly report to Congress. The United States Agency for International Development, the USAID, which administers the majority of U.S. government spending for Afghanistan, and the Treasury Department refused to cooperate with SIGAR in any capacity, while the State Department was selective in the information it provided pursuant to SIGAR's audit and quarterly data requests, sharing high-level funding data but not details of agency-supported programs in Afghanistan. Some agencies rebuffed the Inspector General multiple times, the Hill previously reported an October email indicating that USAID and the State Department had both, quote, largely declined, unquote, to respond to requests for information following a June notice to lawmakers from SIGAR. The U.S. has provided more than $1 billion in aid to the people of Afghanistan since removing its troops from the country last year. While SIGAR struggled to fully assess the U.S. government's role in a post-withdrawal Afghanistan, it was able to pull together a bleak assessment of conditions in the country since the U.S. exit. So here, I feel like I just need to add a little bit of context to my personal point of view on this. My personal point of view is we should not have been in Afghanistan for as long as we were. I believe pulling out of Afghanistan was the right move. I believe the way that we pulled out of Afghanistan could have been planned better by my cat, Edgar, who is not known for his intelligence, or my old combat boot could have figured out a better way to have done it. And so my critique on what happened is not based on my belief that we should still be there or Americans should still be there. That's not what it's about, and like I said, we're starting off here in Afghanistan with this inability to provide accountability for money, because I believe the same thing is going on in Ukraine. So back to it. Enough babbling. A U.S.-backed effort to promote a free press has largely evaporated under the Taliban rule. You don't? Wow. I wonder if you could have predicted, as most of the progress made in the quality of life for women, whether in education, healthcare, or the economy. The watchdog reports the Taliban has essentially wiped out 30 years of developments, including that current conditions are similar to those under the Taliban in the 1990s. SIGAR found that women and girls now face significant risks, including reduced access to education, healthcare, loss of employment, including the ability to become economically or otherwise independent, and heightened personal safety and security risks, on top of having to wear drapes. UNICEF estimates that more than 3 million girls who previously attended secondary school no longer do so following a ban on education for women past the elementary school level. It's a move the international agency estimates will cost the Afghan economy up to $5.4 billion in lifetime earning potential. The figure coincides with a broader economic collapse since the U.S. exit. The entire country is facing an intense food insecurity, with nearly half resorting to skipping some meals. More than 18 million people face life-threatening levels of hunger, including 6 million facing near-famine conditions. Check out the feature topic link on Abracast.com. We did... it was almost in real time. I'm trying to remember what the name of the episode was. I think it was called 9/11 in Context. It was like part 4, maybe the postmortem of the war on terror, something like that. More than half of the country is in need of humanitarian assistance, with some 600 million needed in just the next few months to prepare for winter by upgrading shelters and giving out clothes and blankets. Since the withdrawal, Afghanistan has seen 40% of its media outlets close to loss, 60% of its journalists, according to data from Reporters Without Borders. Since August 2021, the Afghan media sector has mostly collapsed under the weight of the Taliban's restrictions and censorship, Sigar wrote, concluding that without long-term institutional support, the independent journalists inside and outside the country, Afghanistan's media may not be able to withstand the Taliban's efforts to totally control the flow of information about the country. Okay, so we're going to put this in the rearview mirror and get to Ukraine and Russia. So a couple episodes ago, we were talking about the Russian nuclear doctrine, escalate to de-escalate. And I kind of stopped in the middle of the episode to sort of ponder on the meaning of attacks and weapons of mass destruction and asymmetrical warfare, and how those terms have subtle gradations. And so we're going to talk about this article. Liz Truss allegedly sent a message saying, quote, "It is done," unquote, to Blinken after Nord Stream sabotage. So this Liz Truss, unless you were watching this situation, it's easy to have missed it because it only took like 6 weeks for this Liz Truss, to have been elected in and then quitting her position as Prime Minister of the UK. So here's we're going to the article. You know, we've been talking about this in this World War III episodes too, like this ambiguity regarding what happened to this Nord Stream pipeline. Moments after the Nord Stream pipelines were destroyed by what the international community is calling, quote, sabotage, then United Kingdom Prime Minister Liz Truss allegedly sent a message to United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken that said, quote, "It is done," unquote. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova demanded answers regarding the mysterious, quote, "It is done," unquote, iPhone message allegedly sent by UK's Prime Minister, then the Prime Minister Liz Truss, to the U.S. Secretary of State moments after the sabotage attacks against the Nord Stream network. To be honest, I don't care who got this information and how. I am interested in London's answer to the following question. Did then Prime Minister Liz Truss of Britain send a message to U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken immediately after the Nord Stream gas pipeline was blown up with the words, quote, "It is done," unquote? Zakharova asked in a Telegram post on Tuesday, reports Sputnik. The general consensus has been that the U.S. and or the UK were involved in the destruction of the pipelines. First images of the blown-up Nord Stream reveals 50-meter-long section of missing pipeline. There's a post with a tweet from someone called Kim.com, blue check mark, verified, that says, How do the Russians know that the UK blew up the Nord Stream? They said the Nord Stream pipeline in partnership with the U.S. because Liz Truss used her iPhone to send a message to Sec Blinken saying, "It's done," a minute after the pipeline blew up and before anybody else knew. iCloud admin access rocks. Someone needs to get Kim.com on the phone and figure out what the fuck whatever is talking about. On Monday, the U.S. Defense National Security outlet reported that among the information suspected to have been leaked from Truss's hacked cell phone was the aforementioned text message between the now former UK leader and the top U.S. diplomat. It isn't immediately clear whether Truss sent this message using the phone that was hacked or if she used a different phone. A series of explosions knocked out 3 or 4 strings of the Nord Stream network on September 26th of this year. Western officials and mainstream media immediately began claiming without evidence that Russia has blown up its own $20 billion pipeline. The Kremlin accused the West of an unprecedented act of state terrorism involving the Nord Stream, but did not name any specific states, with Putin only hinting at involvement by the Anglo-Saxons, which is noted that is typically a reference to the Brits and the Americans in Russian usage. After a month-long investigation, the military Minister of Defense revealed Sunday that Britain's Royal Navy took part in planning and organizing and carrying out the Nord Stream attack. Adding to the problem of trust, the Swedish government has refused to share its investigation results with Russia, the owner of the Nord Stream pipeline. The cover-up is obvious. So here we go, just one step closer. The next is the U.S. Air Force to deploy nuclear-capable B-52 bombers to Australia as tensions with China grow. The United States is preparing to deploy up to 6 nuclear-capable B-52s, tin roof, rusted bombers to northern Australia. A provocative move, experts say, that is aimed squarely at China. We can't get any flat earth people on the phone to comment. An investigation by Four Corners can reveal Washington is planning to build dedicated facilities for the gigantic aircraft at Tyndall Air Force Base south of Darwin. The U.S. has drawn up detailed plans for what it's called Squadron Operations Facility to use for the Northern Territory dry season and adjoining maintenance center and parking area for the 6 B-52s. Arakalopsta. Becca Wasser from the Center of North American Security says putting B-52s in northern Australia is a warning to China. As fears grow, Beijing is preparing for an assault on Taiwan. Having bombers that could range and potentially attack mainland China could be very important in sending a signal to China that any of its actions over Taiwan could also expand further. She says the bombers are part of a much larger upgrade of defense assets across northern Australia, including the major expansion of the Pine Gap intelligence base, which would play a vital role in conflict with Beijing. The B-52s have been the backbone of the U.S. Air Force for more than 60 years, with the capability to deliver long-range strikes of both nuclear and conventional weapons. The U.S. documents say that the facilities will be used for deployed B-52 squadrons. The ability to deploy U.S. Air Force bombers to Australia sends a strong message to adversaries about the ability to project lethal air power, the U.S. Air Force told Four Corners. Asked when the B-52s would begin their deployment at Tyndall, Australia's Department of Defense declined to comment. Sorry, we can't give all this information out. The tip of the spear. Some worry having B-52s rotating through Tyndall each year locks Australia into joining the U.S. in any conflict against China. It's a great expansion of Australian commitment to the United States war plan with China, says Richard Tanter, a senior research advocate at the Nautilus Institute and longtime anti-nuclear activist. It's a sign to the Chinese that we are willing to be the tip of the spear. Mr. Tanter sees the planned deployment of the bombers as more significant than the rotation of U.S. Marines through Darwin each year. It's very hard to think of a more open commitment than we can make a more open signal to the Chinese that we are going along with American planning for a war with China, Mr. Tanter says. Ms. Wasser says the growing importance of the Northern Australia to the U.S. makes Darwin and Tyndall targets in any war with China. Her work includes running war game exercises to examine how a potential conflict might unfold, probably pretty disastrously. She says in the war game scenarios where Australia either joined the fight or allowed Washington to use bases in the top end, it would be very much put a bullseye on Australia. Ultimately, these attacks were not successful because of the long-range required, and because China had already expended most of its capable long-range missiles earlier in the game. But who's to say that in the future China might have more advanced missile capability that would be better suited to potentially attacking Australia? China's growing confidence about Taiwan invasion. In recent months, U.S. war planners and analysts have brought forward estimates of when Beijing may look to take Taiwan. In the time frame for the assault on Taiwan, it would put at 2025 or 2027, says the defense academic Orison Schuyler Maestro from Stanford University. This is largely dependent on when I think the Chinese leadership, in particular President Xi Jinping, can be confident that his military could do it. I think that is not even the biggest. I don't think that's even the biggest criteria. That's not even the biggest part of the formula. It's what we're going to do when he does it. That's what he's paying attention to. In my humble opinion, I'm no Henry Kissinger, but she says there's a growing confidence with the People's Liberation Army that it could successfully invade Taiwan. For 15 years, I would ask the Chinese military if they could do this, invading Taiwan, and the answer was no. So the fact that for the first time at the end of 2020, they're starting to say yes, I think that's a significant message that we should be paying attention to. She says the U.S. has big plans for Australia. Big plans. You know what that means, Australia? You should run. You should get the fuck out of there. These growing tensions with China have made Northern Australia a crucial defense hub for the U.S., which has committed to sending more than $1 billion upgrading its military assets across the top end. In Tyndall Air Force Base, expansion includes a parking area that can accommodate 6 B-52s, forecast to cost up to U.S. $100 million. The U.S. Air Force says that the parking lot will be finished in late 2026. The RAAF's ability to host United States Air Force bombers as well as train alongside them demonstrates how integrated the two of our air forces are. In April, the U.S. Department of Defense budgeted $14.4 million U.S. dollars, or $22.5 million, for the squadron operations and maintenance facility in Tyndall. The squadron operations facility is required to support strategic operations and to run multiple 15-day training exercises during the Northern Territory dry season for deployed B-52 squadrons. The U.S. documents say the U.S. is also planning to build its own jet fuel storage tanks. You'll have no fuel to put in them, but we can store it. And an ammunition bunker at the site. The north of Australia in the new geopolitical environment has suddenly become strategically much more important, if not crucial, for the U.S., says Paul Dibb, a former senior official at the Department of Defense in Canberra. The great presence of the U.S. forces in Australia was hinted at during last year's annual ministerial meeting known as AUSMAN. Under so-called Enhanced Air Cooperation, it was agreed that there would be a rotation deployment of U.S. aircraft of all types in Australia. Today, we endorse major force posture initiative and will expand the access and presence in Australia. The U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has said, so saith Lloyd Austin. There was no mention of rotating B-52s through Tyndall, although there has been hints in recent years. Equally important to the growing U.S. presence in northern Australia is the construction of 11 giant fuel storage tanks in Darwin. Some of these fuel reserves were previously located at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, but is now being dispersed across the region. Without a kind of insurance of jet fuel in the country, the U.S. would simply wouldn't be able to treat Australia as a location from which it can stage military exercises and operations with confidence, says Ashley Townsend from the Carnegie Endowment for international peace. Mr. Townsend says the B-52s at Tyndall are just the start. We will see much greater numbers of U.S. military personnel forward located in Australia. That will include personnel from all three services, Navy, Air Force, and the Army. Well, where's the fucking Space Force, as well as the Marines in Darwin, which are likely to be expanded, he says. The Osman communique that was flagged as part of efforts to advance force posture cooperation to deter our adversaries. So, while both governments have signaled the growing U.S. military presence in Australia, the expansion of one site is veiled in secrecy. There has been very little said about Pine Gap, the joint U.S.-Australian spy base near Alice Springs is undergoing a major upgrade, according to Richard Tanter. He spends months poring over satellite images of Pine Gap and estimates the number of giant antennas has grown by more than a third over the past 7 years. This is at a time when Australian Parliament has been informed of none of this. No statements by ministers, no questions by politicians. He says, Mr. Tanter says, Pine Gap's powerful ears and eyes are now heavily focused on China. The searching for Chinese missile sites, the searching for Chinese command sites in a preparatory way is absolutely on high priority at Pine Gap now, he says. This indicates that extraordinary importance and that the increasing importance to the U.S. at the time of potential war with China. If a conflict broke out between the U.S. and China, Tanter says Pine Gap would play a hugely significant role, particularly around missiles and defense systems. Pine Gap would be detecting the launch of the missiles. It would be cueing U.S. missile defense systems to find that missile in midair and attack it with their own missiles. He says Pine Gap's geolocation technology would then be used to find and destroy the missile launch sites. Paul Dibb, who had a high-level security clearance at Pine Gap for 30 years, says, it is the most potent intelligence collection facility that America has outside the U.S. Mr. Dibbs says this put Pine Gap on targeting lists for the former Soviet Union during the Cold War, and that it would be on the same list for China if any conflict with the U.S. It looked as though this crisis was going nuclear. China may want to take out Pine Gap as being the ears and eyes of America's capability, he says. All right, here we go to the Politico. The U.S. speeds up plans to store upgraded nukes in Europe. The fielding of an improved gravity bomb has been moved up to December as Vladimir Putin threatens the region. The United States has accelerated the fielding of more accurate version of its mainstay nuclear bomb to NATO bases across Europe, according to a U.S. diplomatic cable and two people familiar with the issue. The arrival of the upgraded B-6112 airdropped gravity bomb, originally slated for next spring, is now planned for December, U.S. officials told NATO allies during a closed-door meeting in Brussels this month, the cable reveals. The move, which involves replacing older weapons with newer versions at various storage facilities in Europe for potential use by U.S. and allied bombers and fighter jets, come amidst heightened tension over Russia's threat to use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine and growing concerns that the West needs to do more to deter Moscow from crossing that line. The upgrades to the B-61 program have been openly discussed in budget documents and public statements for years. The Pentagon officials have said the upgrades are necessary to ensure the stockpile is modernized and safe. Asked for comment, Pentagon spokesman Brigadier General Patrick Ryder responded via email that we aren't going to discuss details of our nuclear arsenal. Modernized modernization of U.S. B-61 nuclear weapons have been underway for years, and plans to safely and responsibly swap out older weapons for the upgraded B-61-12 versions are part of a long-planned and scheduled modernization effort. It is in no way linked to current events, and Ukraine has not stepped it up in any way. The arrival date came as a surprise to some longtime observers who fear it could further stoke an already dangerous situation in Europe. The announcement is at the meeting in Brussels came days before NATO kicked off its annual nuclear exercise known as Steadfast Noon. The 2-week exercise ends Sunday and includes some 70 aircraft, and on Wednesday, Russia held a nuclear exercise that his defense chief described as simulating a massive nuclear strike in retaliation for nuclear attack on Russia, according to the Kremlin. This is all dangerous. It would be odd to rush it in, says Hans Christensen, director of the Nuclear Information Project at the Federation of America Scientists, who has been closely tracking this program. They have been saying, we don't respond to this situation with nuclear weapons. I don't think they want to go down that one. The message behind sending the first bombs in December may be directed more at European allies that feel especially vulnerable to Moscow. My guess is that it's aimed more towards NATO than Russia, said Tom Kolina, the director of policy at Plowshares Fund, a disarmament group. There are older B-16s already there. The Russians know that. They work just fine. The new ones will be newer. All right, genius, but it's not really that much of a difference. But it may be a way to assure the allies when they are feeling particularly threatened by Russia. Two people familiar with the issue of the upcoming shipment to Europe confirmed an accelerated time frame reported by the diplomatic cable. They asked not to be named due to the sensitivity of the issue. The cable, which has not previously been made public and was written to be distributed throughout the Pentagon and State Department to give policymakers a rundown of what was discussed among defense ministers at the NATO meeting, clearly indicates that the allies are jittery. The document states that during the meeting, 15 NATO allies raised concerns that the alliance must not give in to Putin's nuclear blackmail. Given the rising volume and scales of Russia's nuclear rhetoric, a subset of allies requested continued consultations at NATO to ensure continued readiness and consistent messaging, the cable adds. Yet Kolina has also warned that any nuclear-related moves, however modest they might be, could have unintended consequences. It could be escalatory, he says. We'll see, he says. It could be escalatory. The B-61 is a family of nuclear bombs first developed in the early 1960s and initially demonstrated at underground nuclear tests in Nevada. A dozen versions have been developed over the decades, and most of them have since been retired. The $10 billion B-61-12 life extension program is managed by the Department of Energy and is meant to replace several earlier versions, including about 100 bombs stored at air bases in Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Turkey. The upgrades are all in the non-nuclear aspects of the unguided bomb's design and involve removing a parachute and installing a new tail kit and other improvements for significantly greater accuracy, Christensen said. The new version is also designed so that the U.S. and Allied bomber planes and fighter aircraft, including B-2s and B-21 bombers, and F-15-16s and F-35s and Tornado fighter jets, are all able to carry the weapon, as opposed to several older versions of the B-61 that have been in storage for years. The warhead itself is one of the most versatile in the U.S. arsenal because it is its explosive power can be dialed up or down depending on the target, making it either low or medium yield weapon. The new timeline for arrival is a sign that the Pentagon is determined the weapon is ready sooner than planned, Christensen said. It pointed out that the DoD Inspector General was expected to complete a review of the weapon's performance ahead of training for air crews either late this year or early next year. The Air Force conducted flight tests on the new bomb design on the F-35A in October 2021 and certified it on F-15E in 2020. But the Pentagon reported in February that it planned to complete the nuclear design certification of the B-6112 with the F-35A before January 2023, after which the U.S. Air Forces in Europe will all start certification training. I thought those two things were going to happen before you saw the physical arrival, Christensen said. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also told NATO allies in Brussels this month that the administration's long-awaited nuclear posture review, which could be released in the coming days, would maintain Washington's decades-long nuclear declaratory policy of calculated ambiguity, the cables reported. This is a shift from President Joe Biden's comments during 2020 presidential campaign, in which he said he would consider changing U.S. policy to state that the sole purpose of atomic weapons is to deter a nuclear attack against America or its allies, a change that nuclear disarmament groups had pushed for. The administration has since walked those comments back, just like every other comment he makes. But Austin's assurance that European allies that the U.S. nuclear declarative policy will remain unchanged comes as capitals on the continent are looking for a steady hand in Washington to confront the nuclear-armed Russia and China. James Acton, co-director of the Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, said Biden's sole purpose comments during the campaign rippled across Europe, and there was a big campaign by U.S. allies to convince him not to do so, and that campaign was successful. During the Brussels meeting, I think it's hilarious that we just assume that he actually means what he says. I don't think he knows what he's talking about at all at any point in time. During the Brussels meeting, Austin also informed allies that the review would support the full modernization of the U.S. nuclear triad while retiring the B-83 gravity bomb and ending the nuclear sea-launched cruise missiles program started by the Trump administration. Orange man bad. But lawmakers oppose halting the cruise missile program. We will likely continue funding it in upcoming defense policy legislation. Okay, on to the Washington Examiner. John Sweet, the U.S. must be ready for Putin's dirty distractions. While the West continues to fixate on Russia's claim that Ukraine is preparing to detonate a so-called dirty bomb, Russia may be preparing to launch a second invasion from Belarus to Kyiv. Russian President Putin is feeling the pressure in Moscow. He needs to alter the strategic direction of the war in Russia's favor. Still, Russian allegations of a Ukrainian dirty bomb plot could simply be pretext for a preemptive strike. Putin has been busy trying to co-opt Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko to join his war. At the same time, Russia is utilizing Iranian kamikaze drones that sounds awesome, to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure and residential areas. The New World Order will compensate for Russia's losses in Ukraine war. Will Belarus come to Putin's rescue? Lukashenko has been complicit in Putin's special military operation since its onset He has allowed Russia to gain forces to stage in Belarus and permitted ballistic missile launches against Ukraine. So let's just back up here, because we have another. I have another article regarding another questionable state helping Russia. U.S. and North Korea North Korea covertly supplying artillery shells to Russia for Ukraine war. North Korea has been secretly supplying Russia with significant number of artillery shells to support its war in Ukraine, the National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said at a press briefing Wednesday, Reuters reported. Driving the news, North Korea is trying to make it appear as though they are being sent to countries in the Middle East or North Africa, Kirby added per AP. Kirby did not offer estimates on how much munitions North Korea has sent, but he insisted that the shipments were not going to change the course of the war because of Western efforts to aid Ukraine. Our indication is that the DPRK is covertly supplying, and that we are going to monitor to see whether the shipments are received. Per Reuters. The big picture, the development comes nearly 2 months after the U.S. intelligence indicated that Russia was buying millions of rockets and artillery shells from North Korea for its war in Ukraine. Russians' reliance on other powers such as North Korea and Iran for supplies is indicative of the shortages it is facing in maintaining its war in Ukraine. Okay. One more. I think I got one more here. Russian army discussed when and how to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Dmitry Medvedev said that Kyiv's objectives threatening the existence of Russia and so allows for the use of nuclear weapons. So this is big, right? This kind of goes to what we were talking about last time. Senior Russian military commanders recently discussed how and when the Kremlin would use tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, the New York Times reported on Wednesday. According to the report, Putin was not part of the conversation. Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder said on Tuesday that there were no indications that the Russian leader has made a decision at this time to employ nuclear weapons. Also on Tuesday, Security Council of the Russian Federation Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev said on Telegram that Kyiv's objectives to return all occupied territories to its control constituted an existential threat to Russia and would allow for the use of nuclear weapons. According to the Times, intelligence reports about the nuclear weapons conversations were shared with the U.S. government in mid-October. October 25th, a senior U.S. official told the Times that there were new and troubling developments involving Russia's nuclear arsenal, but did not provide additional information. Dirty bombs and tactical nukes. The report came as Russia was claiming that the Ukrainian forces were preparing to use a dirty bomb or even a nuclear bomb. According to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, a dirty bomb is a type of radiological dispersal device that combines conventional explosives such as dynamite and radioactive materials. Most RDDs would not release enough radiation to kill people or cause severe illness. The conventional explosive itself would be more harmful to people than the radioactive material. A dirty bomb is not a weapon of mass destruction. We've mentioned previously that is not necessarily true, but a weapon of mass disruption, where contamination and anxiety are the major objectives. Ukraine responded at the time and persisted that the persistent Russian claims that Kyiv planned to detonate a dirty bomb made it appear as though Moscow itself planned to conduct a false flag operation and that the Ukraine has never had any plans to develop a dirty bomb. Tactical nuclear weapons are lower yield bombs that would allow the destruction of enemies on the battlefield rather than strategic weapons launched to cause mass destruction to an enemy. Tactical nuclear weapons have never been used in combat. Yet, I'm John. This is the Abracast. Talk to you guys in a few days.
Thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed the show. Please send an email or find us on social media and let us know what you think about the show. We would appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rate and review wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find Stigmata Studios, graphic, novels, and comic books at Abracast.com. Welcome to the Red Archive. Get access to over 50 hours of archived episodes, more bonus audio, additional exclusive content. All this for only $1 a month. Find the link to the Red Archive at Abracast.com.